A Winter Brothers Christmas. A Winter Brothers of Palmar Island bonus story. Written by Susanne Ash. A note from the author. Hi, Susanne Ash here. I'm so happy you decided to listen to the bonus epilogue I've written for the Winter Brothers of Palmar Island novels. The scenes below take place after the last book in the series, and it's best read after you've finished all books in the series. They are: Under the Mistletoe, Starlit Wishes, Christmas by Candlelight, A Christmas Homecoming, and of course it all started with Harbor of Thanks, a sweet Thanksgiving romance. Pick up and read any of the novels you haven't read yet, or haven't read in a while. All of the books are available on Amazon Kindle and through Kindle Unlimited. And if you prefer to listen, there's a playlist on my YouTube channel. All set? Great. Have fun visiting with the extended Winter family and the new additions to the clan. Happy reading. Susanne Ash. Chapter 1. Maggie Winter paused in the farmhouse kitchen, breathing in the mingled scents of sugar cookies and fresh pine. Outside, a light dusting of snow painted Palmar Island in shades of white, unusual for December, but perfectly timed for the holidays. Through the window, she could see Ethan helping 2-year-old Charlotte feed the chickens, though more feed seemed to be landing on her tiny boots than in the coop. Olivia moved around the living room, carefully unpacking the box of family ornaments they'd bring out later when everyone arrived. The soft clink of glass and metal drifted through the house, mixing with the everyday sounds of Charlotte's delighted giggles from outside. Maggie smiled, gathering ingredients for another batch of cookie dough. The farmhouse kitchen had seen countless Christmas preparations over the years, but never quite like this. Now it echoed with Charlotte's constant chatter, Olivia's gentle humming, and the everyday symphony of a home filled with 3 generations. Up. Up. Charlotte's demand carried through the back door as Ethan stepped inside, his daughter balanced on his hip. Both of their cheeks were pink from the cold. I think someone's ready for hot chocolate, Ethan announced, already reaching for the cabinet where they kept Charlotte's special snowman mug. After she washes those hands, Olivia called, appearing in the doorway with tinsel in her hair. How did she manage to get so messy just feeding chickens? She's a Winter, Maggie and Ethan said in unison, sharing a knowing look. Maggie watched as Olivia lifted Charlotte to the sink, helping her with the soap while Ethan prepared their drinks. The familiar dance of their little family moved around her, filling spaces that had grown too quiet after her boys moved out. Now the old farmhouse had come alive again, creaking and settling around them like a contented sigh. Gamma. Charlotte wiggled free from her mother and ran to Maggie, hands still damp. Cookie? Not until after lunch, sweet pea. Maggie bent to kiss her granddaughter's forehead, breathing in the peculiar mix of winter air and baby shampoo. But you can help me make more for when your uncles arrive. Charlotte's eyes lit up at the mention of her uncles. Baby? That's right, Uncle James and Aunt Sarah are bringing the baby. Maggie lifted Charlotte onto a kitchen stool, securing her with practiced ease. And Uncle Daniel and Aunt Ava, and Uncle Mark and Aunt Lena. And presents? Charlotte added hopefully, making them all laugh. You are definitely your father's daughter, Olivia said, rescuing a cookie cutter from Charlotte's grip before it could reach her mouth. Always thinking ahead to the presents. I seem to remember another little boy who used to count the packages under the tree every morning, Maggie said, watching Ethan's ears turn pink. Some things never changed, even as everything else did. Speaking of presents, Olivia said, expertly redirecting Charlotte's attention to the cookie dough. Did James say what time they're coming over? Sarah mentioned Emma's been a bit fussy with the weather changing. Around 4, Maggie began rolling out the dough, watching Charlotte pat it with flour-dusted hands. After Sarah checks on the Thompsons' new foal. Ethan snorted into his hot chocolate. Always one more animal emergency. She wouldn't have it any other way, Maggie smiled, remembering how naturally Sarah had taken to being the island's vet. Now she was a mother too, balancing both roles with the same steady grace she brought to everything. While they talked, Charlotte had grown suspiciously quiet. Maggie turned just in time to see a flower-dusted bottom disappearing around the corner toward the living room. A crash from the living room made them all jump. The tree! Olivia gasped, already moving. I've got it, Ethan said, setting down his mug and following his wife. What did your bear knock over this time, troublemaker? Maggie watched them go, their voices blending as they discovered whatever chaos Charlotte's stuffed bear had caused. These were the moments she'd dreamed of when her boys were young, the house full of laughter, little feet pattering on old floors, new traditions weaving seamlessly with old ones. She turned back to her baking, listening to the comfortable noise of her family. Olivia had resumed humming, Silent Night this time, while she arranged cookies on cooling racks. Through the window, Maggie could see Henry in the barn, probably taking one last inventory of their Christmas preparations. They'd need the extra chairs from the loft, and the long tables they used for holiday dinners. Cookie done? Charlotte's voice piped up from the doorway, her father close behind. Crisis averted, Ethan reported. The bear just wanted a better view of the tree. No casualties except Dad's old motorcycle ornament, but I think we can fix it. That ornament survived 3 decades of Christmas trees, Maggie said, already planning how they'd repair it. It's not about to give up now. Like the Winter family itself, the ornaments had weathered their shares of bumps and falls, always emerging stronger. She looked around her kitchen, at the cookie dough under Charlotte's fingernails, the tinsel still caught in Olivia's dark hair, the way Ethan leaned against the doorframe just like his father used to. In a few hours, the house would be bursting with the rest of her children, their laughter and love spilling from every corner. But for now, she savored this quiet moment with the family that had brought new life to the old farmhouse. Gamma? Charlotte's small voice drew her attention. More flour? Of course, sweet pea. Maggie reached for the flour canister, ready to begin again. After all, they had a lot of cookies to bake before the whole family arrived. The crunch of tires on gravel brought Maggie to the front window just as the winter sun began to set. Daniel's truck pulled into the drive, headlights cutting through the early evening shadows, James and Sarah pulling in behind them. Sarah had Emma bundled against the December chill, the baby sound asleep in her carrier. Last one's here, pay for dinner. Daniel called out, jumping from his truck. He rushed to open Ava's door with exaggerated gallantry, making her laugh. We were checking on a new foal, Sarah protested, but she was smiling. Some things can't wait for family dinner. Maggie stepped onto the porch, drawing her cardigan close. Well, I'd say bringing new life into the world is a fair excuse for being late. See? Sarah shot Daniel a triumphant look. Mama Winter agrees with me. Mama Winter is biased toward medical professionals, Daniel said, hefting their bags. Especially ones who keep the farm animals healthy. Uncle Danny. Charlotte burst through the door, making a beeline for her favorite jungle gym. Daniel dropped the bags just in time to catch her mid-leap. There's my favorite monkey. He swung her high, her delighted shrieks echoing across the yard. Have you been practicing your animal sounds? Maggie moved down the steps to embrace Sarah, peering into the carrier at her youngest grandchild. Emma's dark lashes fluttered against her cheeks, her tiny lips pursed in sleep. How's our little one doing today? She just woke up from her afternoon nap, Sarah said. Though the drive over here nearly put her back to sleep. The car tends to do that, James added, adjusting the diaper bag on his shoulder. Even with their house on the other side of the island, he'd come prepared with what looked like enough supplies for a week. I heard that, Sarah said, catching Maggie's amused glance at the overpacked bag. You'll thank me when she needs her third outfit change of the evening, James replied with the confident tone of a man who'd learned that particular lesson the hard way. Ava approached with her camera in hand, already documenting the moment. The light is perfect, she said, snapping a photo of Charlotte now perched on Daniel's shoulders. We should get some family shots, before it's gone completely. Let's get everyone inside first, Maggie suggested, noting how the temperature was dropping. Where are Mark and Lena? Right behind us, Daniel said, ducking to carry Charlotte through the door without bumping her head. They stopped to pick up Miss Doris. Another set of headlights swept up the drive. Mark's voice carried across the yard as he helped Miss Doris from the car, Lena already moving to gather the covered dishes the older woman insisted on bringing. Maggie stood for a moment, watching her family converge on the farmhouse. James and Sarah moved in perfect sync, maneuvering baby and belongings up the steps. Daniel's laughter mixed with Charlotte's as they disappeared inside, Ava following with her camera still capturing every moment. Mark and Lena flanked Miss Doris like protective bookends, the three of them chatting easily. Inside, she could hear Ethan and Olivia greeting everyone, their voices rising and falling in the familiar cadence of family reunions. Emma's soft cry joined the symphony, quickly soothed by James's gentle murmur. The old farmhouse seemed to expand, making room for all the love and life pushing at its seams. Quite a sight, isn't it? Henry appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. Maggie leaned into him, remembering other Christmas gatherings, when their boys were small, when the house felt too empty after they left, when they began bringing home the women who would become their wives. Now here they were, their family growing and changing in ways she'd never imagined. "Come on," Henry said softly. "Let's go watch Daniel try to convince our granddaughter that sloths are just upside-down monkeys." Maggie laughed, letting him guide her inside. Through the door, she could see her family arranging themselves in familiar patterns, James installing the baby swing with precision while Sarah and Olivia compared notes on sleep schedules, Daniel entertaining Charlotte while Ava captured it all on camera, Mark and Lena helping Miss Doris arrange her dishes just so. They had built this, she realized. Not just the farm or the family business, but this tapestry of love and laughter, of shared stories and new beginnings. And watching her children grow into the men and women they'd become, seeing them find love and build their own families. It was better than anything she could have wished for. "Gamma!" Charlotte called from her perch on Daniel's shoulders. "Uncle Danny says sloths are silly monkeys." "Oh, does he now?" Maggie stepped into the warmth of her home, ready to join whatever debate her son had started. After all, these were the moments that made a family, the playful arguments, the shared laughter, the love that filled every corner of their old farmhouse. Chapter 2. The Christmas market glowed like a jewel in the heart of Palmar Island, strings of lights crisscrossing overhead and wreaths adorning every lamppost. Maggie walked arm in arm with Henry, content to let their family spread out ahead of them through the festive stalls. "Charlotte, slow down, sweetie," Olivia called out, as the little girl darted between the decorated booths, her red coat flashing through the crowd. Daniel jogged after her, while Ethan tried to head her off at the next stall. "I've got her," Daniel announced, scooping up the giggling toddler just before she could disappear behind a display of wreaths. "Where are you running to, monkey?" "Lights." Charlotte pointed upward at the twinkling strands overhead, then squirmed to be put down again. "More lights." "She's getting faster every day," Henry said, his voice warm with pride. "And more determined," Maggie chuckled, watching Charlotte take off again the moment her feet touched the ground, this time with Daniel and Ethan both trailing in her wake. Though she comes by that honestly enough. The market had changed over the years, growing larger and more elaborate, but its heart remained the same. Many of the vendors were familiar faces. They were slant locals who'd been setting up their stalls since before her boys were born. Miss Betty's niece still sold hand-dipped candles from the corner booth, and old Mr. Peterson's carved wooden ornaments drew crowds, just as they had 20 years ago. "Mom." Mark waved them over to where he and Lena stood examining delicate glass ornaments. "Remember these?" "No touch, Charlotte." Olivia's voice carried over the crowd as her daughter made a beeline for the shiny display. Ethan caught her just in time, swinging her up into his arms. "Pretty," Charlotte declared, pointing at the ornaments while settling against her father's shoulder. Maggie approached the display, smiling at the hand-painted spheres that caught and reflected the twinkling lights. "Your father bought me one just like this our first Christmas on the island." "I did?" Henry peered at the ornaments. "The blue one with the snowflakes?" "The red one with the pine branches," Maggie corrected. "It still hangs in the front window every year." Nearby, James cradled Emma against his chest, the baby snug in a carrier and watching the lights with wide eyes. Sarah stood close, adjusting the tiny hat on their daughter's head. The sight reminded Maggie of countless Christmas markets past. In her mind's eye, she pictured the 4 little boys bundled against the cold, their eyes bright with wonder at the lights and music and magic of it all. Santa! Charlotte's excited shriek drew everyone's attention. She wriggled down from Ethan's arms and shot toward the far end of the market where the island Santa had set up his chair. "I'll go with her," Daniel volunteered, breaking into a jog to keep up with his niece. Ava followed with her camera ready, always prepared to capture these precious moments. "The Santa line's at least 30 minutes, Olivia sighed, but her smile was fond. "She has your patience, honey." "None at all, you mean?" Ethan grinned, already moving to join the queue with their daughter. Maggie squeezed Henry's arm, watching Charlotte bounce with excitement as she waited in line, her uncles taking turns entertaining her with silly faces and Christmas songs. Some things changed. Her boys had grown into men, found love, started families of their own. But other things remained constant. The way Daniel could turn any weight into an adventure. The protective way James watched over those he loved. The quiet steadiness Mark brought to every situation. And the joy Ethan found in simple moments with his daughter. String quartets setting up, Henry nodded toward the small stage where musicians arranged their seats. The same family had been providing music for the market for 3 generations now, though the current players were barely older than their grandchildren. "We should find a good spot," Maggie suggested, knowing how much Emma loved music. Sure enough, James and Sarah were already moving closer to the stage, while Daniel used the promise of music to finally coax Charlotte away from the Santa line. As they gathered to listen to the music, Maggie took in the scene before her. Charlotte danced in circles around her parents' legs, her energy seemingly endless even after racing through the market. Emma dozed against James's chest while Sarah leaned into his side. Daniel and Ava shared quiet whispers and secret smiles, their hands clasped together. Mark stood behind Lena, his arms wrapped around her waist as she swayed to the music. The first notes of Silent Night floated through the crisp evening air, and for just a moment, Charlotte stilled, her small face tilted up to listen. Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. Not sad tears. How could they be, surrounded by so much joy? But tears of gratitude for this family they'd built, for traditions passed down and made new again, for love that grew and changed and flourished like the island itself. Henry's hand found hers, warm and familiar. Together they watched their family, their legacy, their greatest adventure, all gathered under the twinkling lights of another Christmas market on Palmar Island. The carolers gathered near the town square's massive Christmas tree, their red scarves bright against the darkening evening. Maggie watched her family settle in to watch the performance, each finding their own comfortable arrangements among the growing crowd. James had positioned himself at the edge of the gathering, giving Emma a clear escape route if the noise proved too much. Sarah stood in front of him, his free arm wrapped around her waist, while their daughter watched the lights with fascinated eyes. Every few minutes, James would drop a kiss on Sarah's temple or whisper something that made her smile. They'd fallen into parenthood with the same steady grace they brought to everything else. "No, sweetheart," Olivia's gentle voice caught Maggie's attention. Charlotte had spotted another toddler and was making a determined push through the crowd. "Let's stay with Daddy and watch the singing." "Friend." Charlotte protested, but allowed herself to be scooped up onto Ethan's shoulders, instantly mollified by her improved view. Ethan and Olivia exchanged a look over their daughter's head, one of those silent conversations that only parents of toddlers seem to master. Olivia's hand drifted to her stomach, a gesture so subtle that Maggie might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. Her heart skipped a beat. Could they be? But before she could ponder further, the carolers began their first song. "I love this one," Lena whispered, loud enough for Maggie to hear. She stood with Mark's arms wrapped around her, their bodies swaying slightly to "Angels We Have Heard on High." "You say that about every Christmas song," Mark teased, earning himself an elbow in the ribs. "That's because every Christmas song is the best Christmas song." Lena tilted her head back against his shoulder. "Except Little Drummer Boy. We all know how you feel about that one." "Pa rum pum pum pum," Daniel sang quietly from nearby, dodging Mark's half-hearted swat with practiced ease. Ava caught Maggie's eye and shook her head, her smile fond as she watched her husband dodge his brother. She had her camera out as always, but for once it hung forgotten around her neck as Daniel pulled her close, humming the offensive song directly into her ear until she laughed. "Remember the Christmas pageant when Daniel tried to convince everyone he should do a solo?" Henry murmured in Maggie's ear. She did. Daniel had been determined to steal the show as a shepherd, staging an impromptu performance of Away in a Manger that had the entire congregation trying not to laugh. James had attempted to restore order from his position in the back row, while Mark and Ethan maintained their roles with long-suffering patience. The carolers transitioned into "O Come, All Ye Faithful," and a hush fell over the crowd. Even Charlotte seemed to sense the moment, her constant movement stilling as she watched the singers with wide eyes. Emma, who had been starting to fuss, quieted at the gentle melody. "Getting a little broody there, baby brother?" Mark's quiet voice carried during a lull between songs. He nodded toward Emma, who had finally dozed off against James's chest. "He better be," Ethan added, adjusting his grip on Charlotte's legs. "This one needs a cousin closer to her age." Daniel rolled his eyes, but Maggie noticed he didn't loosen his hold on Ava. "You're one to talk. Charlotte's going to be what, 2 years older than your next one?" The sudden silence that fell over their little group had nothing to do with the carolers starting "What child is this?" Olivia's hand flew to her mouth while Ethan tried, and failed, to look innocent. "Ethan Winter," Sarah breathed, "do you have something to share with the class?" "We were going to wait until Christmas morning," Olivia began, but her smile gave everything away. "Another grandbaby?" Maggie couldn't keep the joy from her voice. Charlotte, oblivious to the excitement below her, chose that moment to join in with the carolers at full volume. "What child is this who laid to rest?" Inside voice, "Sweet pea," Ethan reminded her, though he was beaming with barely contained pride. "The newest Winter should make their appearance around June," Olivia confirmed, accepting hugs from Sarah and Lena while trying to avoid squishing Emma. "June's a perfect month for baby number 3, Daniel said with exaggerated innocence, earning himself another swat from Mark. "Or July," Ava added, her eyes twinkling. "August is nice too." Maggie watched the friendly banter flow around her, her heart so full it ached. Henry's arm tightened around her waist, and she knew he felt it too, this perfect moment of family and joy and possibility. The carolers began "Hark! The Herald Angels Sing," and Charlotte's enthusiasm proved infectious. Soon their whole family was singing along, their voices joining dozens of others in the square. Emma stirred at the noise, but didn't wake, somehow sleeping through her cousin's enthusiastic contribution from atop Ethan's shoulders. Looking around at her family, at James and Sarah with their sleeping baby, at Ethan and Olivia sharing their joyful secret, at Mark and Lena still swaying together, at Daniel and Ava with their gentle teasing and meaningful glances, Maggie felt the magic of the season sweep through her. Their family kept growing, changing, evolving, yet somehow remaining exactly what it had always been, a circle of love that expanded endlessly to welcome each new addition. "Herald Angels Sing," Charlotte sang out again, her small voice rising clear and sweet above the crowd. Maggie watched her sons laugh and sing with their wives, watched them share knowing looks and gentle touches, watched them love each other and the family they'd built together. The winter air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, mingling with the sweetness of hot chocolate and roasted chestnuts from nearby vendors. String lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars, casting their warm glow over the gathered families. This was Christmas on Palmar Island, not just the sights and sounds and smells, but the way it brought people together, the way it wove magic through ordinary moments. Yes, Maggie thought, watching Charlotte conduct the carolers from her perch on Ethan's shoulders, this was exactly what Christmas should be. A celebration of love, of family, of joy that grew with each passing year, bright as Christmas lights against the winter sky. Chapter 3. Steam rose from pots on the stove as Maggie and Sarah worked side by side in the farmhouse kitchen. The rest of the family had scattered. Henry and the boys were hanging Christmas lights outside, Olivia and Lena taking Charlotte and Emma for their afternoon naps, and Ava documenting it all with her camera. Here, Maggie handed Sarah another potato to peel. I still remember the first time you helped with Christmas dinner. You've come a long way from being afraid to chop an onion. Sarah laughed, accepting the potato. James says my knife skills have improved dramatically, though he still insists on doing all the precise cuts himself. Some things never change. Maggie smiled, remembering how particular James had always been, even as a child. He used to reorganize the silverware drawer by size. Now he organizes Emma's clothes by color and season. Sarah's voice held nothing but fondness. Though I have to admit, it does make early morning changes easier. As if summoned by her name, Emma's cry drifted down from upstairs. Both women paused, but the sound quickly settled. Olivia's got her, Sarah said, though Maggie noticed how her shoulders relaxed when the crying stopped. She's been amazing, showing me all her tricks with Charlotte. Maggie stirred the simmering pot of soup, letting the familiar motions carry her back through years of cooking with her children underfoot. The first baby is always the hardest. You're learning everything for the first time, second-guessing every decision. Did it get easier? With each of the boys? Easier in some ways, harder in others. Maggie added a pinch of thyme to the pot. By the fourth one, I knew what a real emergency looked like versus a simple cold. But trying to meet 4 different sets of needs? That was its own challenge. Sarah set down her peeler, her expression thoughtful. I can't imagine having 4. Some days I feel overwhelmed with just Emma. You're doing beautifully with her. Maggie touched Sarah's arm gently. I see how she lights up when you walk into a room, how secure she feels in your arms. That's what matters. Not whether you've mastered the perfect swaddle or memorized every developmental milestone. Thank you. Sarah's voice wavered slightly. Sometimes I forget to look at the big picture. James is so good with schedules and routines, and I worry I'm not organized enough. Oh, sweetheart. Maggie set down her spoon and turned to face her daughter-in-law fully. Do you know what I see when I watch you with Emma? I see a mother who knows exactly what her baby needs. James brings his gifts to parenting, and you bring yours. Together, you're exactly what Emma needs. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, laughing softly. Sorry. I'm still emotional from all the hormones, I guess. Never apologize for feeling deeply about your child. Maggie returned to her soup, giving Sarah a moment to compose herself. Besides, wait until she takes her first steps. Then you'll really see some tears, and not just from you and James. Henry sobbed when Daniel finally started walking. Really? Daniel was the last? Oh yes. The others were all early walkers, but Daniel was content to charm everyone into carrying him everywhere. Maggie chuckled at the memory. Then one day he just stood up and ran across the kitchen, like he'd been planning it all along. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the gentle bubbling of soup and the rhythmic scrape of the peeler against potatoes. Through the window, Maggie could see her sons attempting to untangle a particularly stubborn string of lights, while Henry supervised with poorly concealed amusement. Can I ask you something? Sarah's voice was hesitant. Of course. How did you do it? Raise 4 boys who turned out so good? Who love each other and support each other and built these beautiful lives? Maggie considered the question carefully. By remembering they were always their own people, not extensions of what Henry or I wanted them to be. James's need for order, Mark's quiet strength, Ethan's steadfast heart, Daniel's wild spirit, those weren't traits to be corrected, they were gifts to be nurtured. Sarah nodded slowly. I see those qualities in them every day. The way they are with each other, with their wives, with Charlotte and Emma. It's special. It is. Maggie agreed, watching through the window as Daniel dramatically fell into a snowbank, making Mark laugh so hard he nearly dropped the lights. But what makes me proudest isn't just who they've become. It's the partners they've chosen. The families they're building. I never thought I'd find this, Sarah admitted quietly. When James and I first got together, I was so focused on my practice, on proving myself as the island's vet. But your family folded me in like I'd always been here. Because you had been, in a way. Maggie squeezed Sarah's hand. We were just waiting for you to arrive. The back door burst open, letting in a blast of cold air and the sound of male laughter. Mom. Daniel called out. Please tell Mark that the lights don't have to be perfectly symmetrical. Don't drag Mom into this, Mark protested, snow melting in his hair. Maggie and Sarah shared a knowing look as the brothers' friendly argument spilled into the kitchen. This was family, the messy, joyful, imperfect reality of it. The love that filled every corner of the old farmhouse, that welcomed new members with open arms, that grew stronger with each passing year. They're impossible, Sarah whispered, but her smile was bright. They're yours now, Maggie whispered back. For better or worse? Definitely for better, Sarah said, watching James attempt to mediate between his brothers while simultaneously dodging the handful of snow Daniel had smuggled inside. Maggie returned to her soup, her heart full. This was what she'd always wanted for her boys. Not just success or happiness, but this. Love that multiplied, family that expanded, joy that deepened with every passing season. The noise from the living room suggested the light-hanging debate had evolved into a full family discussion. But here in the kitchen, Maggie and Sarah continued their quiet work, adding their own kind of love to the Christmas preparations, one peeled potato at a time. Maggie surveyed the crowded dining room with satisfaction. The old farmhouse table, extended to its full length with both leaves added, barely contained the feast. It held golden brown turkey, boats of steaming gravy, colorful roasted vegetables, and fresh rolls that filled the air with their yeasty warmth. More precious than the food, though, was the family gathered around it. Henry sat at the head of the table, Charlotte's high chair pulled close to his right so he could help with her meat-cutting duties. Emma sat in Sarah's lap, one tiny hand curled around her mother's finger, her eyes tracking the movements of her extended family. This gravy is incredible, Mom, Mark said, reaching for the boat again. Different recipe? Sarah's suggestion, actually, Maggie nodded toward her daughter-in-law. A little fresh rosemary makes all the difference. Charlotte, tell everyone what you're going to teach the baby, Olivia prompted, catching her daughter in the act of building a potato mountain. Charlotte sat up straighter in her high chair. Flowers. And chickens. She punctuated each word with a potato-covered finger pointed skyward. And carrots. Sounds like you've got the whole farm covered, Daniel grinned, reaching across to high-five his niece. But maybe we should wait until the baby's a little bigger for the chicken lessons. Speaking of garden plans, Ethan said, cutting Charlotte's dinner into smaller pieces, Dad and I cleared that sunny spot near the kitchen garden. Perfect place for Charlotte's new flower bed. Baby's garden, Charlotte corrected firmly. That's right, sweet pea, Olivia smiled. Your special garden for the baby. Maggie watched the banter flow around the table, noting how Ethan couldn't seem to stop smiling, how Olivia practically glowed with joy. The news from the market was still fresh enough that excitement bubbled up in unexpected moments, warming the farmhouse like summer sunshine. I found some of the old baby books in the attic, Ava said, passing the rolls to Lena. The photos of you boys are priceless. Especially Daniel's attempt to feed his teddy bear mashed peas. That bear had refined tastes, Daniel protested. And speaking of feeding bears. He nodded toward Charlotte, who had somehow managed to share her potatoes with her stuffed bear without anyone noticing. Charlotte, Ethan laughed, wiping mashed potato from the bear's fur. What did we say about feeding Mr. Bear at the table? Hungry. Charlotte declared, as if that explained everything. Well, she's not wrong, Sarah smiled, adjusting Emma in her lap. Everyone needs dinner. Even Mr. Bear? Charlotte asked hopefully. Even Mr. Bear, Henry agreed, his eyes twinkling. Though perhaps he'd prefer his dinner after bath time. The conversation drifted naturally to family stories, the time Mark had tried to teach his goldfish to swim through hoops, James's brief career as a backyard circus ringmaster, Ethan's determination to build a treehouse for his stuffed animals. Remember when Daniel convinced Charlotte that butterflies were just flowers learning to fly? Lena asked, accepting more gravy from Mark. That's a perfectly reasonable explanation, Daniel defended, making Charlotte giggle. Right, monkey? Want to help Uncle Danny photograph some flying flowers this spring? Yes. Charlotte bounced in her chair. Baby too? The baby will be too little for butterfly chasing, Olivia explained gently. But you can tell them all about it. Like story time? Charlotte's eyes lit up. She'd recently discovered the power of being the one to tell the stories instead of just listening. Exactly like that, Ethan confirmed. You'll be the best big sister at telling stories. Maggie caught Henry's eye across the table, sharing a private smile. This was what they'd dreamed of. Not just watching their family grow, but seeing the bond strengthen and twist in new directions. Charlotte already stepping into her role as protective big sister, her uncles and aunts wrapping her in their special brand of love and mischief, everyone making room in their hearts for the newest winter yet to come. Show Emma, Charlotte announced suddenly, climbing down from her chair with surprising agility. She made her way to Sarah, pointing at Olivia. Baby in there. Like flower. That's right, Sarah said softly, shifting Emma so Charlotte could see her cousin's face. Just like you were once a tiny baby too. Big now, Charlotte said proudly. Help baby grow. More happy, Maggie murmured, remembering Charlotte's declaration from the market. The old farmhouse seemed to exhale around them, its walls expanding to hold all this joy, all this love, all this promise of future celebrations around this very table. Henry reached across and squeezed her hand, and Maggie knew he was remembering too, all the dinners they'd shared here, all the announcements and celebrations, all the ordinary moments that had shaped their family into what it was today. All right, she said, rising to fetch the dessert. Who's ready for apple pie? The enthusiastic response, particularly from Charlotte, set off another round of laughter, and Maggie paused in the doorway to take in the scene one more time. Her family, gathered close, sharing food and love and dreams of the future. Another grandchild on the way, and who knew how many more to come? More happy, indeed. Chapter 4. The island church stood silhouetted against the winter sky, its stained glass windows glowing like jewels in the early evening darkness. Maggie paused at the entrance, watching her family make their way up the steps. Each person carried a small candle, ready for the traditional lighting ceremony that would close the Christmas Eve service. Here, let me help with that blanket, she heard James murmur to Sarah as they maneuvered Emma's carrier through the door. Their baby was bundled against the December chill, only her tiny face visible beneath a knitted cap that Maggie had made. Inside, the church seemed to hold its breath, hushed and waiting. Hundreds of unlit candles lined the windowsills and altar, their promise of light somehow making the shadows feel warmer, more welcoming. Pine garlands draped the railings, their fresh scent mixing with beeswax and old wood. They found their usual pew. The same one the Winter family had occupied for generations. Henry led the way, followed by their sons and their wives. Charlotte, dressed in red velvet with a ribbon in her curls, bounced between Ethan and Olivia until her father settled her on his lap. Pretty, Charlotte whispered, or what passed for a whisper at her age, pointing at the Advent wreath with its tall white candles. That's right, Olivia murmured back. We're going to light all the candles soon. Maggie watched Emma's eyes track the movement of shadows on the ceiling, the baby completely alert despite the late hour. Such a contrast to her father, who had invariably fallen asleep during Christmas Eve services as a child. Now James sat straight and tall, one arm around Sarah while the other hand rested protectively on Emma's carrier. The organist began to play, soft notes of O come, Emmanuel, filling the sacred space. Daniel and Ava shared a hymnal, though Maggie knew her youngest son had memorized every Christmas song years ago. Mark and Lena swayed slightly to the music, her head resting against his shoulder. The same as ever, Henry whispered, his hand finding Maggie's. Yet completely different. She knew exactly what he meant. The service followed its familiar pattern, prayers and readings, hymns and moments of reflection. But now Charlotte stage whispered questions about the nativity scene, and Emma cooed softly during the quiet parts, and their family filled the entire pew instead of just a small section. When it came time for the candlelight portion, Maggie's heart swelled watching the flame pass from person to person. Henry lit her candle first, then passed the light to James, who shared it with Sarah. Down the line it went. Mark to Lena, Ethan to Olivia, Daniel to Ava. Even Charlotte was allowed to help, her small hands covered by her father's as they carefully tilted their candle. The first notes of Silent Night rose from the organ, and the congregation began to sing. Maggie looked down their row, seeing her family's faces illuminated by candlelight. James singing quietly to Emma, who watched the tiny flame with fascination. Sarah leaning into his side, her voice clear and sweet. Mark and Lena harmonizing as they always did. Ethan helping Charlotte hold her candle while Olivia rested one hand on her stomach, perhaps already imagining next year's service with another little one to hold. Daniel and Ava stood close together, sharing their light, and Maggie caught the way Daniel's free hand rested at the small of his wife's back, the tender way Ava leaned into him as they sang. Such a change from the boy who used to fidget through every service, who could barely sit still long enough for a single hymn. The candlelight spread through the congregation until the entire church glowed golden, hundreds of small flames pushing back the darkness. Emma let out a delighted gurgle, reaching toward the lights with tiny hands. Charlotte, struggling to stay awake, curled against Ethan's chest but kept her eyes fixed on her candle's flame. Silent Night, Holy Night, the congregation sang, and Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. How many Christmas Eves had they spent in this very spot? She remembered 4 little boys in matching sweaters, squirming and yawning through the late service. Now those boys were men, holding their own children, sharing this tradition with the families they'd built. The final verse began, and Henry's arm slipped around her waist. Together they sang the familiar words, their voices joining with their children's, their grandchildren's soft sounds adding a new harmony to the ancient carol. Outside, the moon had risen, gleaming through the stained glass windows with white brilliance. But inside, their family glowed in the warm light of hundreds of candles, bound together by love and tradition and the magic of Christmas Eve. The church steps gleamed under the Christmas lights as families spilled out into the clear December night. Maggie paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before her. The square had transformed during the service, strands of twinkling lights reflecting off the harbor waters in the distance, creating a magical mirror of stars above and below. "Look, Charlotte!" Olivia's voice carried through the crisp air. "The Christmas star." Charlotte, fighting sleep just moments ago, perked up instantly. "The star. The bright one, right there," Ethan said softly, adjusting his grip on his drowsy daughter and pointing upward. James and Sarah lingered near the church door, tucking an extra blanket around Emma, despite the mild evening. Their daughter was wide awake now, her dark eyes reflecting the lights strung through the live oaks around the square. Mark and Lena had already started toward their car, hand in hand as they walked through the circle of lamplight. "Beautiful night," Henry murmured, pressing a kiss to Maggie's temple before walking ahead to warm up their car. Maggie started down the steps, but stopped when she noticed Daniel and Ava standing off to the side, slightly apart from the departing congregation. They weren't speaking, just standing close together, Ava's head resting on Daniel's shoulder as they gazed up at the star-filled sky. "Sometimes I forget how clear the stars are here," she heard Ava whisper. "Away from the city lights." "Worth every early morning wake-up call," Daniel replied, pulling her closer. "Some moments you need to remember." Maggie approached quietly, not wanting to intrude but drawn to the peace surrounding them. "The harbor fog staying away tonight," she said softly. "Perfect for stargazing." "Perfect timing," Daniel smiled, but didn't release his hold on Ava. "Though I hear we're in for some weather later this week." "Just a little rain," Ava added. "Which means we'll have Charlotte for approximately 3 hours of puddle jumping before she crashes." "Planning to steal my granddaughter?" Maggie teased. "Just borrowing her," Daniel said. "Need to practice our uncle and aunt skills. You know, for future reference." Ava elbowed him gently, but Maggie caught the soft look they shared. "The nice thing about practice," Maggie said carefully, "is that it makes the real thing less daunting when the time comes." "That's what Sarah keeps telling us," Ava admitted. Though watching her with Emma, she makes it look so natural. Natural comes with time, Maggie assured her. And love. Which you two have in abundance. Daniel's arm tightened around Ava's waist. We're not in a rush, he said, but his voice held a note of possibility that made Maggie's heart warm. Still enjoying being just us. And spoiling our nieces, Ava added. And the one to come. Niece or nephew? A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt air and pine, ruffling Ava's dark hair and stirring the Spanish moss that draped the live oaks. Around them, car engines hummed to life, carrying tired children and happy families home to waiting Christmas trees and morning surprises. You know, Daniel said thoughtfully, I used to hate how quiet the island got on Christmas Eve. After the service, when everything stops. And now? Maggie asked, though she could guess from his expression. Now it feels like the whole island is holding its breath, Ava answered for him. Like we're all waiting together for something magical. Daniel smiled down at his wife. You've turned me into a romantic. You were always a romantic, Maggie corrected. You just needed the right person to share it with. Her youngest son, her wild child, her free spirit, looked at his wife with such tenderness that Maggie had to blink back tears. She remembered his restlessness, his need to roam, to chase the next adventure. But here he stood in the falling snow, completely content to simply be still with the woman he loved. Mom? James called from their car. Dad's got the heat running. Go on, Daniel said. We won't be much longer. Maggie hugged them both, breathing in the moment. Don't forget, she said. Christmas morning breakfast. I'm making my famous cinnamon rolls. As if we'd missed that, Ava laughed. Daniel's been talking about them for weeks. Walking to the car, Maggie glanced back one last time. Daniel and Ava remained in their own world, faces tilted up to the star-filled sky, sharing whatever quiet dreams were building between them. Her heart felt full enough to burst. Henry was waiting in the car, Christmas carols playing softly on the radio. They okay? He asked as she settled in beside him. They're perfect, Maggie said, watching through the window as Daniel finally led Ava toward their own car, pausing to dance with her beneath the twinkling lights. Just perfect. As they drove home through the quiet island streets, Maggie thought about love. How it grew and changed, how it built families in expected and unexpected ways. She thought about her sons, each finding their own path to happiness. And she thought about tomorrow morning, when the old farmhouse would ring with laughter and joy, filled with the family they'd built together, one love story at a time. Chapter 5. Dawn was breaking over Palmar Island when Maggie heard the first stirring upstairs. The patter of small feet, followed by Ethan's gentle, "Shoo, let's check if Santa came," brought a smile to her face as she added the finishing touches to her Christmas morning coffee cake. Within the hour, the old farmhouse was fully awake. Charlotte, barely contained in her Christmas pajamas, bounced between the kitchen and living room while the adults fortified themselves with coffee. Emma, surprisingly alert in her holiday romper, watched the proceedings from Sarah's arms with wide-eyed fascination. "All right, sweet pea," Henry announced from his armchair. "Should we see what Santa brought?" "Yes." Charlotte zoomed toward the tree, where presents sprawled in festive disarray. "Pretty boxes." "Hold on there, tornado," Ethan laughed, scooping up his daughter mid-dash. "Let's wait for everyone." Maggie settled onto the sofa beside Henry, taking in the scene before her. The tree lights cast a warm glow over their gathered family. James and Sarah were on the floor with Emma, Mark and Lena curled together in the window seat, Daniel and Ava sharing the oversized armchair. Zoe and Mason had arrived just minutes ago, carrying additional presents. "This one?" Charlotte pointed to a large red package, practically vibrating with excitement. "Pretty please." "That's from Uncle Daniel," Ava said, and Maggie noticed her youngest son sitting up straighter, eager to see his niece's reaction. Charlotte needed no further encouragement. With Ethan's help, she tore into the paper, gasping with delight at the child-sized explorer's kit complete with binoculars, compass, and safari vest. Like Uncle Danny's, she exclaimed, immediately trying to put everything on at once. Now you can be my official assistant, Daniel grinned, helping her adjust the vest. We'll document all the island wildlife together. The gift-giving flowed naturally from there. Emma, more interested in the ribbon than her presents, cooed happily as Sarah unwrapped soft books and tiny dresses. Maggie's heart warmed watching James arrange each item with careful precision, already planning where everything would go in the nursery. "This one's for you," Mark said softly to Lena, producing a long, narrow box wrapped in silver paper. Lena's gasp when she opened it echoed through the room. "A telescope? But how did you?" "For your studio," Mark explained, his eyes twinkling. "So you can study the stars you paint. The view from your window should be perfect for it." "I love you," Lena whispered, drawing him down for a kiss that made Daniel Wolf whistle and Charlotte giggle. Speaking of perfect views, Zoe stood, retrieving a large package from behind the tree. "Mason and I wanted to capture something special for everyone." The family photo took Maggie's breath away. Somehow, Zoe and Mason had managed to get everyone together at sunset, the harbor gleaming behind them. But it wasn't the formal, posed shot Maggie had expected. Instead, they'd caught a moment of pure joy. Charlotte reached for Emma while their parents laughed. Daniel looked like he told some story with elaborate hand gestures, while Ava shook her head fondly. Mark and Lena were leaning into each other. Henry and Maggie stood in the center of it all, their love for their family evident in every line of their faces. "It's perfect," Henry said gruffly, and Maggie squeezed his hand. "Gamma, look." Charlotte's voice drew her attention back to the present. Her granddaughter had discovered the bubble machine in her explorer's kit and was now attempting to document the bubbles floating through the living room. "Careful of the tree, sweet pea," Olivia cautioned, but she was smiling as she recorded the moment on her phone. Maggie watched Emma reach for the bubbles with tiny hands, while James hovered protectively nearby. Watched Mark help Lena unwrap her telescope while discussing the best placement in her studio. Watched Daniel demonstrate proper binocular technique to an attentive Charlotte while Ava captured it all on camera. These were the moments that made a family. Not just the big celebrations or carefully planned surprises, but the small joys, the shared laughter, the love that spilled over in 1,000 tiny ways. The old farmhouse seemed to glow with it, warming Maggie's heart like the morning sun streaming through the windows. "More presents?" Charlotte asked hopefully, already eyeing the remaining packages. "More presents," Ethan confirmed, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "But maybe we should let Uncle James and Aunt Sarah open the one from you first?" Charlotte nodded enthusiastically, and the Christmas morning magic continued, marked by bursts of laughter, exclamations of surprise, and the steady rhythm of love shared between generations. The scent of cinnamon rolls and coffee drew everyone to the kitchen as the morning progressed. Through the windows, Spanish moss swayed in the gentle island breeze, casting dancing shadows across the worn farmhouse floors. Maggie watched her family settle around the farm table, now lined with Christmas breakfast favorites. Her famous rolls dripped with icing, the coffee cake steamed invitingly, and platters of fruit added bright splashes of color to the spread. The traditional winter family breakfast casserole, a recipe passed down from Henry's mother, filled the air with the aroma of sage sausage and sharp cheddar. "Someone's eyeing those strawberries," James observed as Emma, cradled in Sarah's arms, reached toward the fruit platter. Just like her daddy, Maggie smiled, remembering how James had always gone for fruit first. "You used to climb on the counter to reach the berry basket." "Here, let me take her," Maggie offered, noticing Sarah trying to juggle the baby and fill her plate. Emma settled contentedly in her arms, dark eyes taking in the familiar faces around the table. She had James's thoughtful expression, Maggie noticed, the same way he used to study everything as a baby. "Pass the coffee this way?" Daniel called from his end of the table. "Some of us were up late playing Santa." He winked at Charlotte, who was too absorbed in picking the pecans off her coffee cake to notice. "Those nights of interrupted sleep are worth it," Olivia said, noticing the shadows under Sarah's eyes. "Though I suppose I should save that pep talk for myself in about 6 months. Remember when we thought midnight feedings were rough?" Ethan laughed, cutting Charlotte's cinnamon roll into manageable pieces. Then she learned to walk. And climb, Olivia added. And run, they finished together. At least you know what you're in for this time, Lena pointed out, passing the coffee carafe down the table. She paused to refill Mark's mug first, a small gesture that made Maggie smile, remembering how Mark had always taken care of everyone else before himself. That's what makes it scarier, Ethan joked, intercepting Charlotte's attempt to grab a whole cinnamon roll. We know exactly how many sleep cycles we're about to lose. Worth every minute though, James said softly, watching Emma grasp Maggie's finger. His expression softened the way it always did when he looked at his daughter, reminding Maggie of how Henry used to watch their boys sleep. Pretty baby, Charlotte observed, abandoning her deconstructed coffee cake to peer at her cousin. Emma like rolls? She's too little for rolls yet, sweet pea, Sarah explained. But soon she'll be big enough to share breakfast with you. Like my baby? Charlotte asked, patting Olivia's stomach. That baby will take even longer, Ava explained. Remember how we talked about the baby being tiny like a seed right now? Charlotte, more interested in the icing than the conversation, looked up from her methodical demolition of breakfast. Baby soon? Not for a while yet, sweet pea, Olivia smiled. The baby needs time to grow. Like my flowers? Charlotte asked, referring to the little garden patch Ethan had helped her plant last spring. She'd insisted on wearing her gardening boots for weeks after, even to bed. Exactly like that, Daniel chimed in. But hopefully this one grows faster than your carrots. I have nice carrots. Charlotte protested, echoing Ethan's defensive tone whenever anyone mentioned the stunted vegetable crop. They were, Ava assured her, shooting her husband a quelling look that dissolved into a smile. Just compact. Concentrated flavor, Mark offered diplomatically. Is that what we're calling it? Daniel grinned. Because I remember someone saying they looked like. Who wants more casserole? Henry interrupted smoothly, years of parenting having taught him when to head off brotherly banter. Laughter rippled around the table, and Maggie felt the familiar surge of joy that came from watching her family together like this. Emma dozed against her shoulder, while Charlotte carefully picked every raisin out of her coffee cake to make a tiny pile on her plate. Her sons and their wives passed dishes and shared private smiles, the morning sun streaming through the windows to gild them all in soft light. Remember your first Christmas here? Sarah asked James softly. When you insisted on making your own cinnamon rolls? Don't remind me, James groaned. I think we're still finding dried dough in that kitchen cabinet. It was a valiant effort, Henry defended, though his eyes twinkled. Very creative technique. That's diplomatic dad speak for complete disaster, Mark translated. Like you're one to talk, Ethan jumped in. Who was it that tried to improve Mom's coffee cake recipe? That was different, Mark protested. Adding espresso powder made theoretical sense. Theory and practice, Lena patted his hand consolingly. Though I appreciated the thought behind your midnight baking experiment. Henry cleared his throat, raising his coffee mug. I'd like to propose a toast, he said, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had guided their family through so many years. To new beginnings, new babies, new adventures, and new chapters in our family's story. To new beginnings, they echoed, lifting their mugs. Even Charlotte raised her milk glass, though she seemed more interested in the way the light played through the liquid than the toast itself. To finally finishing that gallery renovation, Mark added, his arm around Lena. And to my brilliant wife's first solo show. And to Daniel's new wildlife series, Ava added proudly. Even if it means tracking him down in random swamps. You love our swamp dates, Daniel protested, kissing her temple. To all of it, Maggie said softly, feeling Emma stir against her shoulder. To every moment that brings us together like this. The conversation flowed easily after that, plans for the day mixing with remembrances of Christmases past. Olivia and Sarah compared notes on pregnancy cravings, while Ethan attempted to convince Charlotte that no, she couldn't save her cinnamon roll for the baby. Mark and Lena discussed where the telescope would fit best in her studio, while Daniel regaled Ava with increasingly outlandish predictions for their next year of island adventures. "Think we'll need a bigger table soon," Henry observed quietly to Maggie, nodding toward their growing family. "The table will stretch," Maggie assured him. It always had, somehow making room for one more, then another, each addition fitting perfectly into their expanding circle of love. "More rolls?" Henry asked, already rising to fetch the second pan from the oven. The scent of warm cinnamon filled the kitchen anew. "Always," their children chorused, and Maggie laughed at how some things never changed. The same eager expressions she'd seen on her boys' faces decades ago now shone from grown men, passed on to a new generation as Charlotte bounced in her seat at the promise of more treats. Emma stirred and opened her eyes, reaching immediately for Sarah. As Maggie passed her back to her mother, she thought about the years ahead, more babies to cuddle, more toddlers to chase, more love stories to witness. The farmhouse would see it all, its rooms filling with new memories even as it held the old ones close. "Gamma?" Charlotte's voice drew her attention. "Can we make more flowers for the new baby?" "Of course we can, sweet pea," Maggie assured her. "We'll plant them in the spring, right around the time your little brother or sister arrives." "And carrots?" Charlotte asked hopefully, making Daniel snort into his coffee. "And carrots," Maggie agreed, catching Ethan's grateful smile. "Better ones this time." "I have some ideas about companion planting," James offered, already reaching for his phone to pull up research. "No spreadsheets at Christmas breakfast," Sarah said firmly, taking his phone. "Family rule." "Since when?" James protested. "Since just now," Daniel grinned. "All in favor?" A chorus of aye votes made James shake his head, but he was smiling as he accepted another cinnamon roll instead. The morning light strengthened, warming the kitchen, and the family gathered within it. Outside, another beautiful December day dawned on Palmar Island, but inside the farmhouse, Christmas magic lingered in every laugh, every shared glance, every moment of love passed between generations. Charlotte started humming Jingle Bells between bites, which prompted Daniel to join in with elaborate harmonies until everyone was either singing or laughing too hard to sing. Emma watched it all with wide eyes, one tiny hand curled around Sarah's finger while the other reached for the twinkling lights still visible on the tree in the next room. This, Maggie thought, watching her family around the breakfast table, was what they'd built together, not just a family, but a haven of love that would shelter generations to come. And she couldn't wait to see what new joy each season would bring. Chapter 6. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Palmar Island, the December air holding just enough chill to make Maggie pull her cardigan closer as she stepped out of the farmhouse. Inside, the happy chaos of Christmas Day continued. Her boys were washing dishes and assembling new toys. Charlotte's excited voice carried through the windows as she gave Emma a thorough tour of her new explorer's kit. Maggie heard Daniel dramatically narrating the expedition while Ava's camera shutter clicked, capturing another precious moment. She paused on the back porch, breathing in the familiar scent of salt air mingled with pine. The wind chimes Henry had hung decades ago still tinkled softly, the same way they had sung their boys to sleep on countless summer evenings. Now they played their gentle melody for a new generation. She let her feet carry her down the well-worn path, past the ancient live oak where Mark had built his first treehouse. The remnants of the rope ladder still clung to one branch, though now the tree hosted 3 birdhouses Charlotte had helped Ethan build over the summer. Each one hung slightly crooked, perfect in its imperfection. The kitchen garden came first in her wandering. Olivia's neat rows of winter greens thrived despite the season, a testament to her gentle touch with growing things. Who would have thought Ethan's city-born wife would take to farming with such natural grace? Yet here was the evidence: thriving plants, careful organization, and the subtle touches that marked the space as uniquely Olivia's. Charlotte's little plot sat at the end, currently dormant except for the hardy rosemary plant that had somehow survived both summer heat and toddler enthusiasm. The wooden sign declaring Charlotte's garden in Ethan's careful letters made Maggie smile every time, especially the backward D that Charlotte had insisted on painting herself. Come spring, this space would bloom again, probably with twice as many flowers now that Charlotte was determined to grow a garden for the new baby. Just like her father, Maggie murmured, remembering how Ethan had always been the one to help her with the spring planting. While James meticulously planned the crop rotation, Mark stared at the stars, and Daniel chased butterflies instead of pulling weeds. Ethan had understood instinctively how to nurture growing things. The paddock stretched out beyond the garden, where their 2 elderly horses dozed in the winter sun. The pasture beyond was full of dairy cows, the way it always had been. She could almost hear the echo of young voices arguing over whose turn it was to help with morning milking. The barn door creaked softly as Maggie pushed it open, the familiar scent of hay and leather wrapping around her like an old friend. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. How many moments had the space witnessed? For young boys learning responsibility through morning chores. Countless skinned knees and secret dreams shared in the hay loft. First kisses and marriage proposals, new ventures and familiar traditions. James had proposed to Sarah in a barn very like this one. It had been just after midnight, both of them exhausted from helping a sick horse. Not the romantic setting he'd planned, but perfect in its own way. Now their daughter slept peacefully in the house, while new plans and dreams took shape. The wall still bore the marks of Daniel's latest exhibition, the first time Ava had shown her work on the island. He'd transformed the space with lights and canvas prints, telling their home story through her artist's eye. That show had put both of them on the map, leading to their current success, but more importantly, it had shown them how to blend their separate dreams into a shared vision. The old building had seen births and weddings, and a fair share of impromptu community gatherings over the years. Maggie ran her hand along one of the solid wooden posts, feeling the smoothness worn by years of similar touches. Near the base, barely visible now, were the pencil marks tracking 4 boys' growth, James's precise lines, Mark's steady climb, Ethan's sudden summer spurts, Daniel's determinately stretched measurements when he thought no one was looking. Now Charlotte's marks had joined them, with Emma soon to follow. In one corner, Mark's new telescope sat carefully wrapped, waiting to be assembled in Lena's studio. The packing crate bore his characteristic organization, each piece labeled and cushioned. So like him, Maggie thought, to be methodical even in his gifts of wonder and dreams. Ethan's workshop occupied the back section now, his tools hanging in tidy rows. The scent of sawdust still lingered from his latest project, a rocking horse for Emma, carefully crafted in secret evening sessions while Charlotte supervised from a safe distance, helping by adding creative suggestions. A half-finished dollhouse sat on his workbench, likely for next Christmas, showing how far ahead his heart already planned. Through the wide doors, Maggie could see the oak tree where they'd hung the children's swing. Charlotte used it now, just as her father and uncles had before her. Soon Emma would be old enough to join her cousin, and after that, the new baby. The old tree kept growing, stretching its branches wider each year as if making room for each new addition to their family. A burst of laughter carried from the house. There was Daniel's distinctive chuckle, followed by what sounded like Henry's attempt to assemble something with help from Charlotte. Their voices blended with the island's natural symphony. The distant surf, the rustle of palm fronds, the cheerful argument of cardinals in the crepe myrtle. The farm had changed as their family grew, adapting to new needs while keeping its heart intact. Maggie touched the brass handle of the barn door, worn smooth by generations of hands. Her own mother-in-law had once stood in this same spot, watching her son fall in love. Now Maggie watched her own sons build their lives here, adding their own chapters to the farm's ongoing story. Near the door, a new addition caught her eye. A frame held Charlotte's first attempt at photography, guided by Ava's patient hands. The slightly blurry image showed the barn from a toddler's eye view, complete with a curious chicken investigating the camera. Below it hung one of Ava's professional shots. It showed the whole family at last summer's barbecue, caught in a moment of pure joy. "Mom?" Mark's voice carried from the house. "Charlotte's asking for hot chocolate, and you know none of us make it quite right." "No marshmallow mountains like Gamma," she heard Charlotte add firmly. "Coming," Maggie called back, taking one last look around the barn. The Christmas light caught those eternal dust motes, making them sparkle like tiny stars. Like the magic of the season itself, hanging suspended in this moment between past and future, between memory and promise. Evening settled over the farmhouse like a warm blanket, bringing with it that peculiar Christmas Day magic when time seems to slow and stretch. The fire Henry had built cast dancing shadows across the living room walls, its warm glow mixing with the twinkling tree lights to create a gentle radiance. Maggie settled into her favorite corner of the sofa, taking in the scene before her. Charlotte had finally wound down from her Christmas excitement, curled in Ethan's lap while he read her new book about island wildlife. Danielle supplied sound effects for each animal, making her giggle, despite her obvious fatigue. "That's not what a pelican sounds like," Ava protested, though her camera never stopped capturing the moment. "Are you an expert in pelican vocalizations?" Danielle challenged, before making an even more outrageous sound that had Charlotte sitting up, suddenly alert. Again, she demanded, all traces of sleepiness gone. "I think that's enough wildlife for one day," Olivia laughed, sharing a knowing look with Ethan. She sat in the old rocking chair, one hand resting absently on her stomach as she watched her daughter's antics. On the hearth rug, James and Sarah had created a nest of blankets where Emma lay fascinated by the shadows on the ceiling. The baby's dark eyes tracked the movement of light and shadow while her parents carried on a quiet conversation, their heads bent close together. "Almost like watching you two, once upon a time," Henry murmured, settling beside Maggie with 2 cups of cocoa. Charlotte's earlier demand for marshmallow mountains had sparked a family-wide craving. Mark and Lena had claimed the window seat, his arm around her shoulders as they discussed plans for her studio renovation. "Remember my first Christmas here?" Maggie asked Henry softly. "When your mother insisted on teaching me all the Winter family recipes? You mastered those cinnamon rolls faster than anyone expected," Henry chuckled. Though Mom still claimed hers were better. "They were," James added, proving he'd been listening. "But yours have come close these past 30 years. The tradition lives on," Sarah smiled, nodding toward Daniel's continuing animal impressions. "Some things change," Maggie said, watching Charlotte's eyes grow heavy again, despite her best efforts to stay awake. "And some things stay exactly the same." As if to prove her point, Emma let out a small sound that immediately drew everyone's attention. The baby seemed surprised by her own voice, blinking up at the fascinated faces now peering down at her. "She's got Daniel's timing," Mark observed. "Always has to be the center of attention. Says the man who used to conduct the dinner table choir," Daniel shot back good-naturedly. "You loved my dinner table choir." "We tolerated your dinner table choir," Ethan corrected, shifting Charlotte to a more comfortable position as she finally gave in to sleep. The fire popped and crackled, sending up a shower of sparks that reminded Maggie of shooting stars. Outside, the island night wrapped around their home, the distant sound of waves providing a gentle backdrop to their family's quiet conversation. "Tell about the carrots," Charlotte mumbled, not quite as asleep as she appeared. "The amazing carrots?" Daniel grinned. "The ones that were perfect," Ethan finished firmly, but he was smiling too. "Next year's crop will be better," Olivia assured her daughter. "We'll plant them when the new baby comes, remember?" Charlotte nodded without opening her eyes. "Baby's garden," she murmured. "And Emma's too." "That's right, sweet pea," Maggie said softly. "Gardens for everyone." The conversation drifted like the firelight, touching on memories and dreams, plans and possibilities. Mark and Lena shared ideas for her first gallery showing, while Daniel and Ava debated locations for their next island wildlife documentary. James and Sarah discussed Emma's first Christmas, already planning traditions they wanted to establish. Maggie felt Henry's arm tighten around her shoulders and knew he was thinking the same thing. How blessed they were to witness this, to see their family growing and changing while remaining fundamentally, beautifully whole. The farmhouse creaked and settled around them, its old walls holding their voices, just as they'd held generations of love and laughter before. Through the windows, stars began to appear in the island sky, each one a bright promise of magic yet to come. Emma dozed off to the sound of her family's gentle conversation, one tiny hand reaching even in sleep for her mother's finger. Charlotte drooled slightly on Ethan's shirt, her explorer's vest still securely fastened over her Christmas pajamas. The fire burned low and warm, and the Christmas tree lights twinkled like earthbound stars. This, Maggie thought, was the real magic of Christmas, not the presents or decorations, not even the traditions themselves, but these quiet moments when love filled every corner of their home. The way their family had grown, each new addition bringing their own light to the tapestry of their shared life. The simple joy of being together, of watching their children find their own paths while always knowing the way home. Henry pressed a kiss to her temple, and Maggie knew he felt it too. This perfect peace, this overwhelming gratitude, this bone-deep certainty that they had built something precious and lasting on their little corner of Palmar Island. "Merry Christmas," he whispered, and in those words, Maggie heard everything else he meant. "Thank you, and I love you, and look what we made together." Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance over Palmar Island. Inside the old farmhouse, surrounded by the family they'd built and the love they'd grown, Maggie Winter closed her eyes and offered up a quiet prayer of gratitude. For this moment, this family, this life they shared. For Christmases past and those yet to come. For the magic that brought them all together and the love that would keep them that way. After all, that was what Christmas on Palmar Island was all about: family and love, tradition and change, endings and beginnings, all woven together in a tapestry more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. And somewhere in the quiet night, like a promise carried on the salt air, the magic of Christmas wrapped around them all, binding them together in love's warm embrace. The end. This has been a Winter Brothers Christmas. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2024 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2024 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.